Okay, our next keynote is on kinship, the role of art and narrative in restoring our connection to the web of life. And this is going to be by Maggie Fox, the co-founder of Kinship.
Anyway, Kinship. I and a dear friend, Chelsea Congdon, have put this endeavor together, and it's been a labor of love. For me, as someone who spent my entire career in the world of policy and politics and was very, very happy about it, it was a bit of a rude awakening when I was working for Vice President Gore and running all over the world working on climate to realize that we had half a loaf in terms of what it takes to, at best, to drive real social change in the world. And all of the wonderful work that we and many others have been doing around the world was not getting traction. And in that regard, I started thinking about why. And so this conversation today is an invitation to each of us to think about our work in broader terms than we sometimes do. Not because we aren't smart and we aren't courageous and we aren't fierce, but because we get wrapped up, as we do as human beings, in certain ways of doing things and forget there are other ways that are perhaps ruler. But first I want to talk just a little bit about 3 characteristics of humankind. It's always bothered me that climate science and even natural science has left off what we've learned about human beings in social science. We are fairly predictable in certain areas. One is this incredible drive for connection and belonging. And we often say as activists, why do people choose to do things that are not in their self-interest? Well, that's because the tribes, the groups that we have become loyal to, drive our decisions rather than any kind of logic or rationale. And so one of the most important things for activists to learn and really bring into their work is an understanding that we make no important decisions using information, ever. We buy our homes, we fall in love, we have children, we choose our careers, we do many, many things off of strict emotional response and post-rationalize it brilliantly, in some cases, to justify a decision we were going to make anyway. And the other is we aren't just in need of connection to each other. We are in need of a connection to the web of life, and we have left that behind for many, many years. And so the essence of Kinship's work is to help us realize that until we shift the broken story, the fiction of human superiority and disconnection, we are wallowing in a set of solutions and ideas that are still in the broken story that we have been living in for centuries. So this is a piece, I like that this populates this way, because these are the 3 points I just did, but they are articulated in art rather than words. And so I would say if you remember anything, you'll remember one of these images rather than anything I actually said. So people make sense of the world through shared story. The first time I ever talked about this work, I think I might have gone too far. Uh-oh. Whoops, I did. I got a little heavy-handed with the clicker. Sorry. That's a beautiful slide. Anyway, we'll just keep it and see what happens next. Although I'd really like to know where we are. Some of these slides are visualizations of storytelling through art. Actually, this doesn't work to go backwards, so we won't. We'll just keep going forward. And the whole business of story as the essence of who we are is first you have to understand that story is art and art is story. They are not separate. A painting is a story just as the words are a story. A song is a story, a mural is a story, a piece of pottery is a story. And all those ways that story manifest themselves are tools in the journey to actually understand the world we live in. I love this one. And understand how these forms of storytelling have greater power and reach people, most importantly, not through the mind and not through information, but through the heart. And they stay. These images stay. Now that I wanted to stay with. Oh well, I've got to slow down. That image, and this doesn't actually work, Scott, to go backwards, I guess. Anyway, the one I just pulled up, are you going to come help me? See, this is, oh, okay, try it that way. Okay, well, that's a good idea. Okay. This is what I wanted. And the reason is this is one of the oldest fully indigenous paintings. And why did I bring it up? Because the world, the way they lived and the way we live is in some very fundamental way exactly the same, which is their stories are about the land they live on, the people they live with, the food they hunt for, the plants that they make medicine with, and the stars the constellations they follow. We're very sophisticated, but in fact those same things. What's interesting about indigenous stories as opposed to our stories is that they are entities, they are beings, and they don't ask you to believe in them, they ask you to believe with them. And as we do our work, moving from asking and demanding that people believe in us or in what we say, but instead believe in the work and the actions, that's an entirely different response and has an entirely different reaction. So this is the depiction of the world when we were all in the web of life together. It's a beautiful image, and there will be several of them. And then along came this moment in the 17th century, which I think was talked about in the earlier panel, which is this notion that God said, we have dominion over all. And the art that accompanied this, I always want to notice, this is Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And the beginning of colonization and the beginning of the belief that man superiority over all gave us the right to do any and everything we wanted at any time and in anywhere. Now, you notice that those fingers didn't touch. It's an important thing. That delegation, alleged delegation, never happened. We have lived as if it did. So now the image of the Anthropocene is this, the world we live in, with human somehow driven to rule the world, women, of course, not allowed to be equal, and all the other plants and animals of the world at our beck and call. Well, that's absurd, and we know that. And look where it's led. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these images. Everybody here knows this. Instead of going through the statistics, you know exactly what we're talking about here. And the same is with the loss. 99% of whales. I think I can hardly bear that. Insects, forested lands, all animals and cultures and languages have already been lost. This is the moment when we have to shift this relationship with all of life. I began this work in the context of biodiversity, but it became clear very quickly that every movement that we are all a part of, social justice, climate, and every other, the root of the broken story is at the root of everything we are doing in the world today, whether it's governance issues, democracy, or others. This is at the core, and which is why this has been the most gratifying work I've ever done, because it finally feels like we're getting down to the place where the broken story is the source of all of the disconnect. And of course, the whole world isn't disconnected. Indigenous communities and local communities around the world have never lost that connection, have never misunderstood our part of the web of life. And they need, and as many speakers have said, they need not just to be our guides, they actually need to be the voices that teach us how to live in a different way with the natural world. So this is one of my favorite slides, because the transition from this to this is the journey that we're on. To return to living in harmony with the rest of the living world. And I don't know who Clara Martinez is. I don't know her, but she's in every slide. Hi. If she's here, I thank you so much. Look at the beauty. These are starlings. And so the other piece of news that I just want to share with you is a wonderful, wonderful story in the New York Times Sunday magazine about a week and a half ago about how we have assumed that humans were the only ones with the ability to have language, to understand it intellectually and to formulate it. Well, that's actually utterly untrue. And the science has catching up to the fact that there are literally no creatures on this planet that don't have a language. We don't hear most of it because it's at higher decibel levels than we can comprehend, or that the sounds, like those of whales, are actually things that we might be able to hear through equipment, but we cannot really understand them. But they are very sophisticated, and in many cases that sophistication exceeds ours. Isn't that just so? These starlings in this photograph, do you think this didn't happen without communication? Do you think those extraordinary flocks of birds that we watch in wonder and in awe, this entire formation moves and shifts and grows and shrinks and travels huge distances without communication? No es posible. Nothing in the natural world is without communication. It is just our absolute intransigent unwillingness to see the reality of the power of the natural world, which greatly exceeds ours. The only thing we have more of is hubris. So the survival of this planet literally demands that we change this story of separation and superiority and learn how to live. And why is this so important? Because it's the future we're not drawing. We are talking constantly about the horror and the loss, which are very real. But that doesn't move us in the way that stories of life after, who we can be, how we can live, transformational stories that arise out of ecosystems of creative expression. Think about that. Not just ecosystems of the natural world or of human endeavors, but creative expression has ecosystems. And those ecosystems, actually I should go back one. Let me see if I can do this without making a mess. No, it's not. Yes, I'm going to go back. I want you to notice this. There's a word called scenius. And scenius is the genius of being on the scene at a certain moment where art and musicians come together and transformation occurs. The Bronx in the 70s birthed a whole new global culture of hip hop. It just had its 50th anniversary, which was literally celebrated all over the world. There's a common language in music that we fail to use to the extent the power of it provides us with a connection and a way of reaching people like nothing else. There's so many examples. Hip hop is just one. The other is the whole notion it says mycelial networks have been here for all time, but we've only known about them for about 10 or 15 years. And it's our new beautiful word because we're so excited. But the reality is the scenius and the mycelial network of connection moves through culture. I'm going to take those 3 minutes. And this is what it looks like. So creative expression goes out in sound and music and art and affects the whole world. Those of us in the movement misunderstand that work of art also enhances our work and must. The last one was a very bland looking version of it. Here is what it looks like when the art manifests itself. And the difference between the two slides is obvious. The other is the life of social movements. Biodiversity sits at this place before broad public awakening. And yet climate is finally at that place with this huge contestation and backlash. And we are no more ready for it than we were for the work that actually finally got us here, because we got to broad public awakening with climate through loss and pain and enormous damage. And in that context, we've missed using art, story, and narrative to move things faster. So this ecosystem of life and ecosystem of creative expression are a flow of one to the other, and they are a necessary part of the work we are doing, and not an afterthought, not something that put in as entertainment, but core, at the very core of the work. So Kinship's work is to infuse these two movements with art and creativity to shift the narrative with an express purpose of shifting the narrative, not a subtle, well, that's what we say to each other on the side, but actually literally to identify, to invite, to connect and curate, and to promote and amplify. There's a lot of examples. I'm just going to race through this because of time. But there are murals and novels, fiction and nonfiction. There are clothing. There are instructions and mycelial network. And this is magnificent because it talks about AI and the alternative to it. Fantastic. I mean, literally, the world is now awash in science, proving how little we are superior and how much of the natural world dominates in its beauty and power, and we resist it. So this is Kinship's invitation. There is no revolutionary movement that is complete without its poetical expression. Until the movement is marked by the joyous, defiant singing of revolutionary songs, it lacks one of the most distinctive marks of a popular revolutionary movement. In other words, without the power of art, story, and cultural narrative, we are not acting in our own power. We are not understanding what it takes to move people from the complacency and fear of now to a wholly different future. So, Kinship's work is to inspire, infuse creativity so that our movements become the richest and most powerfully creative movements of all time, because frankly, that's what it's going to take at every level to move us beyond. And the art is everywhere. It is with us all the time. And it is not we are not inviting it and providing it with the context that it needs in order to drive the power that it has in our lives emotionally and in our hearts and souls. So my invitation to you is to think of the role of art, story, and narrative, not just as that inside of a biodiversity movement, but inside everything we do. Because when we do that, collectively our power is increased by millionfold, not just in terms of how we reach people, but with a sense of possibility and hope and a dream. I think the cruelest thing that we're doing in our movements is not focusing enough on the stories where we can actually envision our lives on the other side of these crises, not living in loss and fear in ways that are almost paralyzing to us, but spending as much, if not more, of our time highlighting the stories where people have already shifted their lives and are living in the kind of joy that we have had in the past and can have again. Thank you.